While most settlers in Haywood County raced against autumn's first frost, scrambling to seal their cabin roofs before winter tightened its grip, 17-year-old Elijah Thorne was doing the opposite. Instead of finishing and moving on, he climbed back onto his completed roof and began building another one, directly above it. To his neighbors it looked like insanity. The first roof was already solid. Cedar shingles, steep pitch, tight seams, everything a mountain cabin needed to survive rain and snow. But Elijah raised a second frame exactly 14 inches above the first, supported by carefully measured vertical posts. Between the two roofs he left an empty cavity of air. No insulation, no boards, just space. The settlement laughed. They called it waste. They called it foolishness. Some called it arrogance from a boy who didn't know his place. Elijah was using nearly 60% more timber than any sensible builder would. Every extra beam added weight. Every extra surface caught more wind. To experienced mountain men, this violated everything they believed about efficient frontier construction. Marcus Hricks, the region's most respected builder, didn't bother hiding his amusement. He had raised more than 50 cabins across 4 counties and considered himself an authority on survival in the Appalachians. "One roof keeps the weather out," Hricks said loudly one afternoon watching Elijah work. "2 roofs just give snow twice the reason to crush you." Others joined in. Thomas Whitmore, the settlement's surveyor and unofficial expert on structural safety, dismissed the project as desperate improvisation. A boy without parents trying to invent what generations of builders had already perfected. No one imagined how wrong they were. Elijah Thorne worked in silence. Orphaned 2 years earlier, his mother taken by fever, his father crushed in a logging accident, he had been expected to fail. Many assumed he'd sell his 40 acres and drift toward town work before winter ended his experiment. Instead, Elijah built a cabin as sound as any in the valley. And then, inexplicably, he started building on top of it. On clear September mornings, neighbors saw him standing on his finished roof, stretching hemp cord between wooden stakes driven into the shingles. The cord formed a perfect grid, marking where vertical supports would rise. Every measurement was precise. Every post was spaced evenly. Marcus Hricks once paused mid-swing while splitting firewood, his axe frozen in the air as he watched. "Elijah," he finally called out, wiping sawdust from his beard. "Your roof's done proper. Tight. Pitched right. What in God's name are you putting on top of it?" Elijah didn't look up. He adjusted the cord until the rectangle was perfect. "My grandfather wrote about it," he said quietly. "Called it a breathing roof." That earned another laugh. "The old mountain people in Switzerland built like this," Elijah continued. 2 roofs with air between. Keeps heat in during winter. Keeps heat out in summer. Air works like a blanket, if it stays still." Hricks shook his head and returned to his woodpile. Mountain winters were no place for theories. Across the clearing, Thomas Whitmore listened carefully. Unlike Hricks, he wasn't amused, he was concerned. A second roof meant added load on walls and foundation logs. It meant increased wind resistance. It meant complexity where simplicity had always kept people alive. Whitmore said nothing. He assumed the boy would learn the hard way. By late September, the strange construction drew wider attention. Reverend James Caldwell, the settlement's informal leader and moral authority, arrived one afternoon to inspect the work. He carried genuine concern, not judgment, but what he saw left him scratching his head. Above the completed cedar roof rose an entirely separate structure, supported by 47 vertical posts anchored directly into the main beams. The outer roof would be covered not in shingles but rough-hewn oak planks, heavier, stronger, and far less forgiving. The sheer amount of timber was staggering. Over 800 board feet, representing weeks of solitary labor in the forest. "That boy's building a hat for his house," Caldwell later told Hricks and Whitmore. "Enough extra wood to build another cabin altogether." Caldwell had advised Elijah to save the timber, use it for fences, furniture, repairs. Elijah listened respectfully, and kept building. Each morning he climbed onto the roof and added another section. The secondary frame rose exactly 14 inches above the first at every point, never more, never less. The vertical supports were placed with deliberate spacing, distributing weight evenly across the structure. This wasn't guesswork. Elijah was following plans. The plans lived in a stack of journals wrapped in oilcloth inside his cabin. They belonged to his grandfather, a man who had grown up in the Swiss Alps before crossing the Atlantic. The pages were filled with sketches, measurements, and notes written in a blend of German and broken English. Diagrams showed layered roofs, air cavities, and arrows illustrating wind movement and heat retention. Elijah had studied those journals since childhood. He knew the numbers by heart. 14 inches wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated. Wide enough to prevent air circulation that would strip heat away. Narrow enough to trap a stable layer of still air, nature's most efficient insulator. As Elijah set the final support posts, he spoke aloud, repeating his grandfather's teaching method. "Why do we build the second roof?" he asked himself. Then answered, "Because still air is the best insulator God ever made." The settlement didn't hear that part. They only saw a boy stacking timber where none was needed. They didn't understand that while others prepared for winter by stockpiling firewood, Elijah was preparing by reshaping the laws of heat itself. And they certainly didn't know what was coming. Because on February 3, 1894, the mountains would test every belief they held about shelter, wisdom, and survival. And when that test arrived, Elijah Thorne's so-called madness would stand untouched, while everything else failed. 14 inches of trapped air held warmth better than 14 inches of solid wood. That single truth explained everything Elijah Thorne was building, yet it confused every man who watched him work. Wood felt solid. Air felt like nothing. And on the frontier, nothing was never trusted. Elijah's design depended on an idea most settlers had never been taught. Heat escapes when air moves. Stop the movement and warmth stays where it belongs. His cabin roof wasn't just doubled, it was layered with purpose. The inner roof, sealed with tight cedar shingles, handled waterproofing and direct weather protection. The outer roof, clad in overlapping oak planks, did something entirely different. It intercepted wind. It broke snow accumulation. And most importantly, it formed the upper boundary of a 14-inch insulating air cavity that wrapped across the entire roof. In calm weather, that air stayed nearly motionless, creating insulation equivalent to 6 inches of solid timber, without the weight. During storms, the outer roof absorbed the wind's force before it could reach the inner structure, preserving the air gap's insulating power even under extreme conditions. To the settlement it looked like wasted effort. To Elijah it was controlled physics. Marcus Hicks couldn't stop watching. His skepticism had shifted from mockery to professional unease. The Thorne boys' methods violated everything Hicks believed about efficient frontier building. Hicks could roof a standard cabin in 2 days. Elijah had spent 5 full weeks constructing a secondary structure that appeared unnecessary. What worried Hicks most wasn't time, it was weight. By his estimate, Elijah had added nearly 2,400 pounds of timber to the roof system. That load would already be carrying heavy snow by January. In Hicks's experience, extra weight meant failure. "I'll grant the boy works harder than most," Hicks told Thomas Whitmore during their weekly review of settlement concerns. "But he's putting that effort into a design that can't help and might kill him. When real snow comes, that extra roof will bring the whole structure down. Double roof means double the collapse risk." What Hicks couldn't see were the problems Elijah had already solved. The load was distributed across 47 vertical supports, transferring weight evenly into the primary beams. Triangulated bracing tied the inner and outer frames together, preventing lateral shift under wind stress. And the pitch of the outer roof was deliberately steeper than the inner, designed so snow would slide free before accumulating dangerous mass. These weren't decorations. They were solutions to problems Hicks had never been trained to anticipate. Thomas Whitmore felt a different kind of discomfort. His surveying work had taught him that complexity invited failure. Simple structures endured. Complicated ones collapsed. Yet buried in his memory were stories his grandfather once told. Accounts of alpine villages using double walls and layered roofs to survive brutal winters. Whitmore had dismissed those stories as old-world excess. America had timber in abundance. Labor-intensive European methods seemed unnecessary. Now he watched Elijah apply those same principles with precision Whitmore couldn't easily evaluate. November arrived and with it the first real test. Cold settled early over Haywood County. Marcus Hicks's own cabin, built according to 27 years of frontier experience, began demanding constant attention. Fires had to be fed through the night to keep interior temperatures above 42 degrees. By mid-November, Hicks had already burned through 5 cords of oak and hickory, watching his winter supply shrink faster than planned. The heat rose. The roof leaked it away. Every night, warmth radiated upward through the single roof layer, vanishing into the cold mountain air. No amount of firewood could fully replace what escaped. 300 yards upslope, Elijah Thorne's cabin behaved differently. He burned modest evening fires, fuel loads his neighbors considered barely sufficient for an hour's comfort. Yet the warmth stayed. Where standard cabins lost nearly 40% of their heat through the roof, Elijah's trapped air layer captured and held it with mechanical reliability. The difference became visible. On the coldest November mornings, frost coated the interior ceilings of nearly every cabin in the settlement. Ice crystals crept outward from beams and nail heads. Elijah's ceiling stayed dry, warm to the touch. The air between his two roofs maintained a stable buffer that prevented dramatic heat loss night after night. Klaus Weber noticed. A German immigrant who had settled in Haywood County in 1889, Weber had built his cabin using techniques passed down from Bavaria. When he studied Elijah's roof, something clicked. Doppeldach, he muttered to himself. Double roof. He recognized the principle immediately. His grandfather had drawn similar structures, alpine buildings designed to manage heat through air gaps rather than mass. Weber mentioned this to Hrix. Hrix dismissed it. Old country ideas didn't apply here. But Weber knew better. The physics didn't care about borders. By December, the numbers told a story no one could ignore. Elijah had burned 3 cords of firewood while maintaining interior temperatures between 58 and 65 degrees. Hrix had burned 9 cords to keep his cabin averaging 44 degrees on the coldest nights. Ice still formed along Hrix's ceiling by morning. The contrast unsettled every assumption Hrix had relied on throughout his career. Old Jacob Morrison paid a visit just before Christmas. Morrison had survived the brutal winter of 1857, the one that killed 23 people across the Blue Ridge. He had learned to read weather patterns the way other men read ledgers. He stood beneath Elijah's outer roof, studying the structure in silence. "Weather's got that feel," Morrison finally said. "Same pressure drop. Same quiet before the wind." He looked up at the secondary roof. "If we get a storm like 57, he added, "that strange roof of yours might decide which buildings stand, and which don't." Elijah nodded. He had been expecting the test. February 3, 1894 arrived in silence. The kind mountain people feared. Marcus Hrix's mercury thermometer read 18 below zero at dawn. By noon, wind began pushing down from the northwest, steady and rising, carrying the promise of something far worse. And for the first time since Elijah began building, no one laughed anymore. Old Jacob Morrison's weather warnings proved devastatingly accurate. When the great Appalachian blizzard finally arrived, it did not creep in slowly or offer second chances. It descended from the Ohio Valley with the force of a natural disaster, sealing Haywood County inside a frozen siege that would not release its grip for 21 straight days. The storm's opening assault dumped 5 feet of snow in 48 hours, driven sideways by winds that screamed past 90 miles per hour along exposed ridges. Visibility vanished completely. The world became a white void where distance dissolved and direction ceased to exist. Temperatures plunged to 34 below zero, and wind chill calculations suggested exposed skin could freeze in less than 2 minutes. By the 4th day, the settlement began to break. Marcus Hrix felt it first, literally. His roof groaned beneath the weight of snow far beyond anything frontier builders had planned for. Single-layer construction, long trusted and rarely questioned, was never meant to carry loads exceeding 55 pounds per square foot. By the night of February 6, his beams were visibly sagging. At 3:47 a.m. on February 7, the central support cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. Hrix barely had time to drag his family into the storm before the entire roof collapsed inward, crushing their possessions and leaving them homeless in the deadliest blizzard anyone could remember. Thomas Whitmore's cabin failed differently, but no less completely. Horizontal wind drove snow directly against his roof faster than the pitch could shed it. Cracks appeared in 3 major beams by the 5th day. His family fled to a neighbor's structure that would itself fail 2 days later. Between February 5 and February 12, 7 cabins collapsed entirely, their roofs giving way under snow loads exceeding 70 pounds per square foot. The Henderson family lost their infant daughter when their roof failed without warning in the middle of the night. There was no time to escape. Jacob Morrison's cabin survived, but he did not. The 73-year-old collapsed on February 9 after days of non-stop snow removal, his heart giving out under the strain. The settlement was unraveling. Elijah Thorne's cabin did not. While destruction spread outward in widening circles, the double-roof structure weathered the blizzard with mechanical reliability that bordered on defiance. The outer roof, engineered to bear extreme loads, showed no visible stress. Snow piled high, but only temporarily. The reason was structural separation. Snow accumulated on the outer roof alone. The inner roof, where Elijah lived, remained completely unburdened, carrying only its own weight and the fixed load of the secondary structure. More importantly, the outer roof's steeper pitch, 42 degrees instead of the standard 32, forced snow to slide free before reaching dangerous mass. Where Hicks's roof held snow until collapse, Elijah shed it in regular avalanches that thundered harmlessly to the ground. It was self-clearing. And it worked. The thermal performance proved just as decisive. While intact cabins across the settlement struggled to keep temperatures above freezing, and collapsed ones exposed families directly to death, Elijah's interior remained at a steady 52 degrees, maintained with minimal fuel. The 14-inch air gap that neighbors once mocked now provided survival-level warmth no amount of burning furniture could match elsewhere. By February 10, desperation overtook pride. Marcus Hicks was the first to surrender his assumptions. He fought through chest-deep snow toward Elijah's cabin, wind tearing at his clothing and freezing his breath into ice crystals. His fingers were already numb despite heavy mittens. Behind him, tied together with rope to prevent separation in the whiteout, came his wife Catherine and their 4 children, carrying what blankets they had salvaged. "Elijah!" Hicks shouted into the wind. "We need shelter. Our cabin's gone, we're freezing." The door opened. Warm air spilled out. Steam rose instantly from the Hicks family's frozen clothes as they stumbled inside. The contrast struck Hicks like a physical blow. His family had spent 3 nights huddled in a failing neighbor's cabin at 28 degrees, burning furniture just to survive. Elijah's 18 by 22-foot cabin felt like autumn. "Come in," Elijah said simply. "There's room enough." Thomas Whitmore arrived 5 hours later, his professional certainty shattered along with his home. The region's surveying authority now sought shelter from the 17-year-old orphan whose methods he had publicly dismissed. Klaus Weber followed, supporting his elderly mother after their roof tore away entirely on the storm's 8th day. Then came the Pattersons, the Caldwells, the surviving Hendersons still mourning their loss. One by one, families fought their way through the storm toward the only structure still standing with confidence. By February 14, 27 people crowded into a space designed for one. Yet the temperature never dropped below 48 degrees. The double roof system held. Even in crisis, Elijah taught. "Watch the ceiling," he said quietly, placing his palm against the wood. "Feel how steady it stays." He explained how still air doesn't conduct heat, how the trapped air between the 2 roofs functioned like a wool blanket, holding warmth inside instead of letting it escape upward. He described how wind stripped heat directly from single-layer roofs, while his outer roof absorbed that assault before it could reach the living space. "Wind hits your roof and steals warmth," Elijah said. "Wind hits mine and just makes noise." Hicks listened like a student. Tracing the vertical posts with his hand, he finally understood. The weight wasn't concentrated. It was divided, distributed across 47 support points. The outer roof bore the storm. The inner roof bore the people. The principles were simple. But they changed everything. Each vertical post carried no more than 50 pounds of combined structure and snow load. Individually, the weight was modest. Together, the 47 posts transformed how the roof behaved under pressure, distributing force evenly across the entire primary structure instead of concentrating it at fatal points. "My grandfather worked this out in the Swiss mountains," Elijah explained quietly to Marcus Hicks in the storm's aftermath. "They deal with snow loads over 100 pounds per square foot every winter. 14 inches of air. Posts on 4-foot centers. Outer roof pitched at 42 degrees so snow never stays long enough to become dangerous." The math was simple. The results were undeniable. Elijah's double-roof cabin sheltered 27 people for 11 days, maintaining interior temperatures that allowed cooking, sleeping, and normal human life while the world outside remained lethal. Conventional cabins across the settlement suffered a 54% roof failure rate. 7 collapsed completely. 6 more had to be abandoned as beams cracked and ceilings bowed inward. The statistics alone told a story of engineering triumph over tradition. But the most powerful evidence arrived quietly on February 18. Margaret Caldwell gave birth to a healthy son inside Elijah's cabin, delivered in warmth and safety while her own home stood roofless and filled with snow. The child's survival represented more than personal joy. It proved that traditional alpine engineering, dismissed as wasteful and excessive, had created conditions that standard American frontier construction could not achieve under extreme stress. Later analysis would suggest that Elijah's design saved at least 23 lives during the blizzard, possibly more had the storm continued beyond 21 days. When temperatures finally moderated in late February, the work of digging out began. What emerged from beneath the snow was not just a damaged settlement, but a broken certainty. Marcus Hicks, with 27 years of frontier building behind him, faced a humbling truth. His experience had not been wrong, but it had been incomplete. The methods he trusted had evolved for speed and economy, not for the kind of sustained, extreme weather that the mountains could unleash without warning. The boys' wasteful roof had not just been better. It had been essential. In March, as Thaw finally returned to Haywood County, Hrix made his acknowledgement public. On March 12, he began dismantling what remained of his collapsed cabin, salvaging usable timbers while planning a complete rebuild based on Elijah's specifications. Secondary roof frame positioned 14 inches above the primary, 47 support posts on 4-foot centers, outer pitch set at 42 degrees, and over 800 board feet of additional lumber dedicated not to living space, but to trapped air. At the settlement's March gathering, Hrix spoke plainly. "I thought I knew mountain building," he said. "But this boy showed me I was building roofs that couldn't survive real weather. Every cabin I build from now on gets a double roof. And I don't care who laughs." His endorsement carried weight. Across 4 counties, Hrix's reputation had shaped dozens of construction projects. When he changed his methods, others followed. The spread accelerated through immigrant networks, German, Swiss, and Austrian families who recognized in Elijah's design the same double-roof traditions their ancestors had practiced for generations. By the end of 1894, 19 new structures within 40 miles of Haywood County incorporated the breathing roof design. Requests for guidance arrived from settlements Elijah had never visited. County officials took notice as well. Elijah was asked to consult on future construction in vulnerable mountain locations, quietly acknowledging that his methods had prevented multiple deaths during the February catastrophe. By the following winter, the economic impact became measurable. Firewood consumption in double-roof cabins averaged 45% lower than in conventional structures. Families cut fewer trees, hauled fewer loads, and stored less fuel, all while staying warmer. Roof repair costs dropped to nearly zero, as the outer roof absorbed weather damage that would have required constant maintenance on single-layer designs. The additional labor investment, roughly 3 extra weeks per cabin, paid for itself within 2 winters through reduced fuel and maintenance alone. Decades later, science would catch up. In 1978, researchers at North Carolina State University reconstructed double-roof cabins using original materials and specifications. Controlled testing documented 2.4 times greater heating efficiency, consistent temperature advantages of 18 to 24 degrees, and structural load capacity exceeding single-roof construction by a factor of 3.2 under simulated snow loads. Archival evidence reinforced the findings. The Appalachian Heritage Foundation maintains records from 11 double-roof structures built between 1894 and 1912, including construction drawings, fuel logs, and thermal measurements. Together, they demonstrate that breathing roof technology achieved modern-level energy efficiency using nothing but traditional knowledge and observation. Today, contemporary passive house construction employs ventilated roof cavities and air gap insulation based on the same principles Elijah applied in 1893. Modern engineers recognize alpine double-roof techniques as sophisticated thermal engineering developed without formal equations, refined instead through centuries of survival. The boys' wasteful second roof anticipated energy-conscious architecture by more than a century. The final measure of Elijah Thorne's design was not innovation or efficiency, but survival. The Great Appalachian Blizzard of 1894 claimed 58 lives across the Blue Ridge Mountains, most due to structural failures and exposure. Engineering analysis suggests that widespread adoption of double-roof construction could have prevented over 75% of those deaths. Elijah's roof did not merely challenge frontier assumptions. It exposed them. It proved that when traditional knowledge is dismissed as excess or superstition, the real mistake is not in the old ways, but in our certainty that we no longer need them. Sometimes the difference between life and death is not more strength, more fuel, or more effort. Sometimes it is 14 inches of air, put in the right place by someone who remembered what others forgot.